So today's session, the Cloudingo import wizard. If you didn't know, Cloudingo does have an import wizard. And that import wizard works in the same way as the native Salesforce import wizard or as the data loader, but it adds one important feature to that process. And that feature is it dedupes the records on their way in. Now, I do want to say is that we have avoided doing a session in a users group on import for a long time for several reasons. Conceptually, import is not any more complicated or difficult than running a dedupe job on a filter. However, from a support standpoint, probably about 50% of our support requests are for help with the wizard. And that is because there is so much uniqueness to everybody's individual import process and everybody's individual needs. So we have decided to just jump right in and try to show you the import wizard. And we're going to give you the basics. So I'm going to give you a good example of using the wizard and how to use it and how to think about it. And I'm going to talk through some tips and tricks. Jenny and Beth are online, and they're going to interrupt me if they think of something as we're going through that process. So I'm going to start with just talking through thinking about importing data to Salesforce. Oftentimes, when you have an import job that's facing you, there is some pressure to get it in as quickly as possible. And ideally, you get it in as cleanly as possible, and that's where Cloudingo comes in. But you actually have two options that I want to present to you. The first option is to, one, just drop the data into Salesforce. Use the data loader, use Salesforce's native import wizard, and just get it in there. And then you can start working with it. And you can dedupe it after the fact using Cloudingo's dashboard filters, what you probably are doing every day or what you have running through automation and through schedules. That's one way of handling import. That said, that may not be appropriate for everybody or for every use case. You may just really want to get it in clean and not just drop it in and clean it after the fact. Or you might have some workflows or some triggers or some lead assignment rules that you don't want duplicate records to be dropped into Salesforce before they're cleaned. And that's where the import comes in. Okay. So the import that I'm going to show you today is, I'm going to use the word sophisticated, but I don't want you to think that that means it's complicated. I'm going to show you the multi-object import, the contact then lead import. So what the contact then lead import process allows you to do is to check both objects. So think of a file you're bringing in, you've gone to a trade show or you acquired a list from a partner or something like that, and you need to get that in Salesforce. But you don't know, are these going to be contacts? Are they going to be accounts? Are they going to be leads? What are they? The contact then lead import allows you to handle the analysis of that file all in one process. So you don't have to do contacts separately and then export the results and run it again through lead. So that's the import process I'm going to show you today. Contact then lead. All right. On a contact then lead import, I am going to show you this, so just bear with me. You have to look at my face for just a few more seconds. The contact then lead import gives you 4 options when you're bringing in the data. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to look for matching contacts. And when you find a matching contact, you can merge it. Okay? And it pulls it out of that list from your file. The second option it gives you is if it finds a matching account, but not a matching contact, you can optionally insert that record as a new contact under the existing account. Okay? And then it takes it out of the mix, out of the file. The third option, it will then look for matching lead records. And where it finds a lead match, it merges them and takes it out of the file. And then the end, the remainder, is your net new records in that file, and you can push them in as new leads and let them go through your flows and your lead assignment rules and all of that. Okay, hopefully everybody's tracking with me so far, because now it's time to actually start looking at this. So let me share my screen. And I'm going to take my camera off for just a moment so that you have full screen. Jenny, Beth, Olivia, are you seeing full screen of the Excel file?
Perfect.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is this is a sample Excel file that I'm going to use for our little test demo today. It's very simple, it's very short. The reason I kept it simple and short was I wanted the process to run quickly so that we can get through it. Now, I wanted to start with the file because it is important and it is normal to spend a little time grooming your file before you jump right into the wizard. I can't tell you the number of times we have clients who jump right into the wizard, and I do understand that. You've got this file, you just want to get it in, you want to get things going, you want to get your process done, get the data in, and move on to the next task. But it is really helpful to spend a little time just grooming your file. And what do I mean by grooming your file? Well, this is a very simple file. But the first thing I would look at is, do you have columns in your file that don't map to any fields in Salesforce? And if so, just delete them. It's extraneous data that you're not going to use, and it makes for a messy, larger file. And it also tends to be a little confusing when you're seeing things in the UI and you're on the mapping screen in the import wizard. So if you have any extraneous columns in your file, delete them. The second thing I do when I look at just grooming of a file is I look at the column headers. Right? And I look to make sure that they, as closely as is reasonable, align with my field names in Salesforce. This just makes mapping a little bit easier and less error prone. And those are easy things that you can adjust and change in the file before you start the process. And then the last thing that I'll look at is, and this is not always possible, we often have customers who are running imports with thousands and thousands of rows in a file. But I will take a scan through the data set and just make sure that things are pretty aligned. Often when you get an export from a partner or even from a trade show event or something like that, you might have a stray phone number in the email column, or you might have an email address in the address column, and so on. If you can kind of clean up your file a little bit, you're not going to hit errors in the process. Okay? So an error is not really a problem through the import wizard, but it just makes for things a little bit smoother and gentler and less anxiety producing. Okay, so that's just grooming the file. Now let's jump over to Cloudingo and actually run this job. All right, so let me, Beth, are you seeing Cloudingo?
We are. All good.
Thank you. Okay, so you should be familiar with Cloudingo and all of your navigation over here on the right, or the left-hand side rather. Just gonna click on the Tools menu and start the import wizard. Okay. All right, now here's your first choice. You can import a file into any of the objects that your Cloudingo account supports. And as I said, I'm going to show you what I would consider to be our most sophisticated import, and that's the multi-object import, the contact then lead. So I'm just going to choose that there. Now, as you choose this, you get some options here. You can choose some default record types. You can choose the account lookup style. You can use an exact match or a company clean match. Remember, those are Cloudingo algorithms. And when you're importing contacts, and Salesforce works the same way, Salesforce and Cloudingo make an attempt to look up the account match as well to identify that you have the right account for the contact that you want to import. Cloudingo also has some added nuances. I don't want to confuse things with this process today, but Cloudingo also gives you some additional options for identifying the correct account, and that's the state and the city. Jenny, am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
So long as you map them. So if you have columns in your file that include, say, for example, billing city and billing state, you can map those to the account, and Cloudingo will incorporate them in looking up the correct account. So it adds some additional layers of lookup. But right now, we're just going to focus on the account name. Okay? All right. I'm going to drag over my file and just drop it right into Cloudingo. Okay? And as Cloudingo processes that file, it gives you some additional options. Again, we are bringing in data. The idea of an import is to create new records. So when you create new records, do you need to assign those records to a campaign? Do you need to set a particular lead status? Do you want a note created on those records? Or do you want them assigned using any particular kind of owner assignment? Okay, I'm not going to select any of these, but these are just some additional options so that you can tag your new records and make sure that they align with your business model, your data model. Okay. All right. So now Cloudingo is going to use its internal intelligence to map for me. And because I groomed my file as I recommended, my column headers all align beautifully with my field mappings. Right? You can see they're all correct. But it is so important. I cannot tell you how important it is that you verify these mappings. And I can't tell you the number of times I see where there's some custom fields that look similar, and so Cloudingo has selected that field to map, and it's the wrong one. So do pause here for a moment and verify your mappings. Now, the one thing I want to point out on this particular screen is that we are doing a multi-object import. So up here at the top, you can see that contact is selected. So contact always comes first, and then lead will be selected. You have to verify both object mappings. Mappings can also be saved sort of as a template, and you can just default to them. Okay. I'm going to click next, and we're actually going to stay right on the mapping screen. And I'm going to show you, see how Cloudingo changed to the lead. Again, we need to tell Cloudingo when we get to each of those objects, how do the columns align with the fields that are in Salesforce? And that's what this mapping is. Okay. All right. I'm just going to click next. And Cloudingo is going to populate the preview from that file. And in the preview, we can actually do some things. We can delete records. We can make changes if we need to. I'm not going to go through any of those details. Again, that gets into sort of the nitty-gritty of the import wizard. And I really just want you to understand conceptually how to do this kind of import, and then we can work with you individually. All right, so as you can see, here's my file. This is just the sample set of data. So I'm just going to click next, and we're going to move on to the actual scanning for duplicates. Okay. Now on this screen, you have a couple of options. You can use a filter from your dashboard, and that's actually what I'm going to do. So remember, you have filters that are saved on the dashboard, and they're always there until you delete them. And you can use any one of those filters. And a lot of times it's helpful to build a filter for an import before you even start the process. You know what you're going to want to match on. But you also have the option of building a filter on the fly within the Cloudingo import wizard. And if you use a one-time filter, it's just there for the purposes of that job. It doesn't create a filter on your dashboard. That's just one simple little difference there. But I'm going to just select this very simple test import filter. It's going to match based on email address and last name. So very simple. I can also choose my automation rule. Remember, your automation rule is how the records are to be merged. And one of the things that I want you to think about is when you're bringing in a file and it's finding duplicates, you might have some different criteria and different requirements for how that existing record that's in Salesforce gets updated from data with the file. So you might need a custom rule there. So just be aware of that. You might need to develop a custom rule for your imports that works or functions a little bit differently than your dashboard filters function. Okay. And then you have some options down here. You can automatically run the automation job so that the duplicates, when it finds it, are merged, and you don't have to click any more buttons and so on. I'm not going to do that because I want to be able to show you what happens through this process. So I'm just going to have it skip merging the groups, and I'm going to start the scan for duplicates. So again, we are starting with the contact object. And on the contact object, Cloudingo is going to compare my file to my Salesforce data, and it's going to look for matching email addresses and last names, and it's going to look for matching accounts. Okay? And in just a moment, we're going to see those results. And you can see why I used a very short and abbreviated file to get this running a little bit faster. And the Cloudingo UI does tend to slow just a little bit when we're using a web conferencing program, so I apologize for that. But this is a good time if you have thought of some questions to be sending those through to the chat, and Jenny and Beth and Olivia will sort of queue those up for the next few minutes. Let me ask Jenny, Olivia, Beth, have any questions flowed in that we can answer quickly that are sort of short, quick answers while we're waiting for this to run?
Yes, we've had several questions and we've been doing abbreviated answers, but one of them that's come up multiple times is customers who don't use leads who want to do a contact and account import. And I replied that the setup would be the same as the contact and account piece here. You just wouldn't use click the leads first. But any
Exactly. Yeah, if you don't use the contact or the lead object in your data model and your operational needs, you would just choose a contact import. And so it skips that whole lead mapping and what you're going to see in just a moment, the rescanning process. Okay, so we have some results here. So let me show you what you're looking at here. The top two records, you see this little icon indicates that there's actually a duplicate for that record in Salesforce. Okay, and we're going to merge those in just a second. These records have also found a matching account, and there's the account ID, and that's also a hyperlink. I can just open that record. If we drop down to the next two, there's no icon here that indicates that those are duplicates, but those records did find matching accounts. Okay, so no duplicate contact, but an account exists. So I'm going to jump into the merge preview and just merge these real quick, merge the two duplicates. And there's my two sets of duplicates, and I'm just going to merge them quickly so we can move on, and we'll go back to the results page so you can see how things look differently.
I just want to interject real quick. If you wanted to double check for accuracy before you mass merge, you can actually load those groups to preview them to see that the correct values are being chosen before you merge, just like with a regular dedupe filter.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. I apologize. I did not open each group in the merge grid so that you could see how things were aligned. I probably should have done that. I'll do that when we get to the leads. There we go, and you can see those filtered through. So I'm going to go back to the results. And there we are, and you can see those top two are their status has changed to merged, and we actually have pulled in the account or the contact record ID. And you can see up here in your summary totals, those numbers have changed a little bit to align with where we're at in this whole process. Okay, so the first thing was we looked for contact duplicates. We found a couple, we merged them, okay, and those are marked as merged in the file. The next thing is optionally these two that found matching accounts, but not matching contacts. So what I'm going to do is just select them, because in my business model, I want those to be new contacts under the existing account. And I'm going to just push those. And push just means that Cloudingo is going to create new records in Salesforce attached to those existing accounts. There we go. Again, Cloudingo's processing, it's inserting those records into Salesforce. And you can see, again, our summary up here has adjusted. We've merged two, we've pushed two, we have 4 remaining, and you can see those statuses have changed here. And again, we've pulled in that record ID for those new contacts. All right. Now we have 4 more records that didn't match a contact and didn't match an account. So what we're going to do is select those 4, and we're going to rescan. Okay. And this time I want to scan against leads. Now, if I needed to do another sort of nuanced scan against the contact object with different field values, I could scan against contacts again multiple times until you're done. But I'm done. I feel good. So I'm going to jump into the lead scan. Okay. And you're sort of back to the same screen that you should be familiar with. I'm going to select a filter. It's the same one. It's matching on last name, and email address. And I can choose a custom rule if I want. Same options we had before. And I'm just going to have Cloudingo start that scan against those 4 records and the lead object. So at this point, Cloudingo is analyzing those 4 remaining records. It's looking at the existing leads in Salesforce to identify if there are any matches based on email address and last name. And hopefully this one will go a little bit faster than the contact. Can't promise you that though. My little dingo's on his wheel spinning. Here we go, it's going a little faster. All right, here we go. Again, we found 2 matches for existing leads, and that's what you can see from this icon here. And there are 2 that haven't matched anything at all. So I'm going to start with those duplicates by just clicking on the merge preview. And this is the part I didn't show you before. So I'm actually going to open that in the merge grid. And here in the merge grid, you can see the records are designated where they're coming from. So this is the Salesforce record, and it by default is always the master, unless you have set something else in your rules. And you have the import record right here. We're just going to merge those.
And sorry, just to interject one more time, if you need it to merge a certain way, so let's say you know that your file contains data that is more reliable than the data that's in the existing Salesforce record, you can configure an import rule that's specifically for import use, which will behave a little bit differently than your regular default rules or your custom rules that you have configured for regular Salesforce dedupe. And one of our rules in there is to take the incoming record value, and you can either always override. So let's say your phone number, you always want to take from your file and override. Then you can set up a field specific rule to say, for phone, I always want to take the incoming record and override what's in Salesforce.
Right, thanks, Jenny. So what Jenny's getting at is you want to think about it this way. If there is a match, a duplicate contact or a duplicate lead, is there anything in the file that you feel is more up to date or more relevant that you want to update that record that's in Salesforce with? And you manage that through the rules, and there are special selections to tell Cloudingo to choose the value that is on your file. All right, so here you can see we're back to the summary page, the results page. We've got 2 pushed, those were the contacts. We've got 4 merged, 2 of those were contacts, 2 were leads, and we still have 2 remaining. So these are our net new, our unique records that didn't match anything. And we want to push those in as brand new leads. And as soon as they get created in Salesforce, they would go through your lead assignment rules. They would go through your any workflows or triggers that you have. And there we go. You can see we now have 0 prepped, and we've got the summary, and everything is done. And when we go back to the imports, it'll show completed. All right. I'm going to share my face again. There we go. All right, everybody seeing me?
Yes, thank you.
So again, the purpose of that demonstration was to orient you to the wizard itself and what it does conceptually. It is not terribly complicated, but what we have found is that our customers tend to, first of all, there's so many steps, and that can be a little bit overwhelming and a little anxiety producing, and I get it. The other thing is that with a lot of our customers, we've found that their import needs tend to be very unique and very specific. And so oftentimes there'll be a little hiccup, or they need some guidance or need some help. So I'm hoping, number one, that by showing you that demo to get oriented, at least you have a sense for how to initially approach an import job. Knowing that, again, you may have some unique and specific needs. So I welcome your questions at this point to share with us. Jenny and Beth are also here. I'm not sure if they're going to share their cameras. They don't need to, but you might hear some disembodied voices. So Jenny, Beth, Olivia, if there are questions that you'd like to share, please do so. If there are questions that require a more detailed response or require a little bit of thought on our part, we'll follow up with those after the fact.
Steve, we had one question that I thought would be useful for the group. Someone asked about if you have required fields that are not included on your list, but are, so they're not included on your file, right? But they are required in Salesforce. And of course they would error. But I wanted to point out in the mapping section, we have that you can map a constant. So if you need, for instance, a particular field that's not included on your list, you can still map that field on the mapping phase and then just put in a constant value, and Cloudingo will have that populated so the records don't error. So that's a really smart thing to be aware of in advance, and just remember to map it on tab 2.
It's also a way of you not having to exit out of the import wizard and then do some manipulation on your file and then start the whole process again. So I'll just give a really simple example. Let's just imagine that lead source is a required field in your data model, and your file of leads doesn't have a lead source, and you forgot about it, and you get halfway through, and then Cloudingo gives you a little error and it shows you red that this is a required field. You can just drop in a constant value there, and it gives that value to all of the records in your file, so you don't have to start over. That's just a very simple example. I know that there could be a lot of other sophisticated use cases.
So another question that just came in, and I'll just read it for you. What is the best practice if the Excel file contains data related to other objects that are not part of the import? For instance, if they include data containing or relating to opportunities?
So that's a very good question.
I can answer if you want. I just responded to this one.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, Jenny, go ahead, and I'll add
And
to
if
whatever.
you want to add to it, I put, so my answer was that you can't map to related object data because you're not importing against those objects. You're only importing against contacts, or you're importing against leads, or if you do account import solely, then you're only importing against accounts. So you're not actually able to map to objects that are not that particular object. So you have a couple of options. You would either want to set up some kind of process internally, like with a flow or possibly Apex code that triggers the opportunity to get whatever you need to get updated on the opportunity that's related. I'm assuming you mean merge. It wouldn't necessarily control how opportunities are created if you create, say, an account or something like that. But when you're merging, if you want it to trigger how something gets updated on the opportunity, you may have to set up some kind of flow for that. And it would be dependent on specific criteria, not necessarily the data in your file. The other and more direct option would be after you complete your upload, since we do provide you with the contact IDs that were either merged or inserted, you know which records you're dealing with, and then you can export that list with the record IDs after you complete the import. And then you can kind of put those record IDs into your opportunity data and then do a separate upload with your opportunity data. But now you have the contact ID or account ID, whatever it is that you're needing to update.
Yeah, this is a perfect example of how so many of your use cases are very unique and very specific, and it requires understanding exactly what your goals are, and usually then we can guide you on how to do that. So one of the things Jenny's suggesting is that remember the results. Once we were finished with that import file, I can export that, and it has all the record IDs. So I have my new contact IDs, or my existing contact IDs, lead IDs, account IDs, the whole bit. And if there were some existing opportunities that needed to be updated, you can then use a secondary process, find data within Cloudingo to find those IDs and do whatever updates you need to do. So sometimes there's another layer of data processing that needs to happen But usually, almost always, there's a way to get there. Would you agree, Jenny?
Yes.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So somebody asked you to demo the constant value.
I'm sorry, say that again, Jenny.
The constant value in the mapping phase. They were wanting to see that.
Oh, Jenny, can I go? Do you know if I can go back?
Yeah, you should be able to. Just hit the back button from step, go into view, and then.
Are you seeing my screen?
We can, thank you.
And while he's working on this, I just wanted to mention too, and I know this hasn't come up in a question yet, but if you do not wish to actually import these records, you're just wanting to scan the file to see if these records exist, but you don't plan to merge or push anything in new. You just want to see what's already in your org and maybe even pull back some additional details. Then you can use our Find Data tool instead of the import tool. And so I think a lot of people don't realize that we have 2 file upload scanning tools available, and one is for import and the other one is just to find data.
Yeah, Find Data. Think of Find Data as a query tool. It allows you to query Salesforce and pull back more data points than what you have in your source file. So
Right.
I apologize, whoever wanted to see the inserting the constant, we can follow up afterwards because I actually completed this import. It's not letting me go back in the steps. It's just taking me right back to the summary screen. So I apologize for that. Yeah. Any other questions?
Let's see. Jenny, can you tell, it looks like we have a hand up in the questions. I'm not sure where it's coming from. That's okay. We have the whole list, so we can get back.
All right. So Beth, Jenny, anything you feel like we would share for the whole group, or are the remaining questions sort of things that are best responded to directly after the fact?
Well, okay, let me just explain the constant really quick because I got another question coming up about that. So what the constant is if your file maybe doesn't contain a column for a piece of data that you need to have included, say for example, I don't know, you want to put, what's a good example?
Yeah, lead source was good. Steve, if you just read your list, but just as leads instead of contacts then leads.
Yeah, so the constant is really just because you maybe you forgot to put it in your file, or you know it's always going to be the same. It would be done in the mapping state. You can add a field, so it would be just like if we were reading your file, but you're adding a new column to it. So you're basically saying, here's the field that I want to add, and here's the value I want set for every single record in this upload. Does that help?
He's showing it now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And here, the add a constant button was right over here. Again, we're in the mapping screen. This field did not have a column represented in the file, but I want to insert this data point when I create the records. And I can add multiples if I want to. Just click OK. And there you are. You can see it added a column, and it's going to insert that value that I typed in there into that field for the records that get created in Salesforce as a result of this input.
And just to address a question that is coming up as you're doing it currently, 2 people were wanting to know, if you use this, can it be used only when there's not a value in the existing record? So yes, that goes back to your merge rules. This would only be applied if it's a new record that you're creating, and of course it wouldn't have one in there to begin with, Or if you say merge and part of your merge rule is to fill in blank fields and there was no source, but it would not override existing data unless you had put in a specific rule to say, I'd rather take the upload value than what's already on my record if I merge.
Yeah, remember that's all handled by the automation rules, or also you can refer to those as merge rules. So that defines how the records are going to be merged. And so what you would want to do in your rule is to set a specific rule for that field that you're setting a constant on. And remember, when we move to the scanning phase, which I'm trying to get there as quickly as possible, you select the rule, the merge rule that you want to apply to this particular import job. So that, remember, the merge rule is created outside of the import. So that's another thing that you need to think of ahead a little bit about before you start the importing process. So that if you need specific filters set up, you have them created. And if you need specific rules set up, you have them created. So that you can sort of go through the import process seamlessly. So again, same thing as grooming your file. Think about your filters, think about your rules before you start the process.
Yeah, and if you know that you never want to override an existing value in Salesforce, but maybe you only want to fill in the blanks, most likely your default rule or the rule that you typically use for regular dedupe would be fine. The time that you really need to worry about creating a separate rule specifically for import would be if you do want to override existing values, because that would require you to set up Steve, I don't know if you want to pull up a rule real quick just so you can show them like the field specific rule that says incoming record. But one of the options in the rule and the field rules is to take the incoming record and always override the master. And the master will always be the Salesforce record that's defined as the master would never be your import, because otherwise we would have to insert the record and then merge the existing record, which is not ideal. It can break a lot of external processes. You know, if you have HubSpot or other apps that kind of link to records, you wouldn't want to delete the existing records. You would want to merge the import into the existing. But like, okay, so what Steve's showing right here is if you are defining an import rule, one of the options that he's got highlighted at the bottom is the incoming record, which is either the import or if you use API integration. But you would choose that if you want to always take the file data and overwrite the master.
And here's an example that might make a little more concrete sense. Let's just imagine that you're bringing in some contacts or leads, and all of your records in Salesforce have phone numbers, but some of your data is years old, and you've just met all of these people at a meeting, and you now have a list, and then you have their current phone numbers, and you want to overwrite that existing phone number with what you believe to be the more current, more recent phone number. You would use a rule like this to update that phone number field.
Yeah, but creating the import rule, I would say our recommendation would be to make a copy of your existing rule that you use for the majority of your regular dedupe, because all of these other field rules that you have for regular merge, you still want to apply. You just need to make sure that the fields that are going to be in your file have a unique specification to take the incoming record to override.
Yeah, what Jenny's getting at is you want to save it as a separate rule,
right,
dedicated for imports and not for managing dedupe on your Salesforce data.
Right. And in the event that we find more than one, let's say you haven't cleaned up your Salesforce data in a couple of weeks, the import can potentially find more than one Salesforce record match. So you're still going to be merging Salesforce records. So if, let's say the import finds 2 or 3 records rather than just one, then you're not just merging the import with the existing record, you're now merging the import with both of the existing records. All 3 would merge at the same time. So you want that baseline rule of how you would handle your fields normally to still get applied. So making a copy of the rule so that the time you spent configuring your regular dedupe is already there. You already have all of those rules configured, so that you're not losing any of that logic. The other option is you could just merge the import into just the master and not merge other records, and that's one of our exception rules.
Yeah,
But
all of that's handled in your automation rules.
But if you're keeping up with your dedupe cleansing, that hopefully shouldn't be an issue.
So we're actually at 50 minutes. We usually like to keep these about 30 to 40 minutes, but if there are some other questions, Jenny and Beth, that you think the group would benefit from, otherwise we can handle them offline. What are your thoughts? I'm not seeing the questions, so you have to tell me.
I think we're at a good spot. We've covered just about everything.
All right. Well, folks, I want to say thank you again for joining us. We very much are committed to our customers, and we like to hear from you and engage with you. And so I appreciate you taking time to join us on the users group. Probably within another 3 or 4 weeks, we'll have office hours. So be on the lookout for that invitation. At the time, if you have questions, we're just sitting here waiting to talk to you. So just come on. And it's also an interesting time to listen to what other folks are saying or how other folks are using the application. And then we'll have another users group, I don't know, in a couple of months. Okay. But in the meantime, I wish you all a great autumn and a great rest of the day. Thank you again for your time. Bye-bye.